Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to cover a subject I've been wanting to cover for a really long time. But I have to say I think that this is probably one of the best times to do it, especially with the no forest thing floating around the internet. It's called cognitive dissonance. A lot of you have already heard of this. A lot of you have done the rabbit hole on this one, but for those of you who haven't, I think you're going to find this rather interesting. Cognitive dissonance is an extremely interesting process. Now, when I say cognitive dissonance, it's sort of like saying Pythagoras' theorem. You know that we don't invent mathematics, we merely discover mathematics. I believe that cognitive dissonance is something that wasn't created. It is something that simply happens within pretty much all cognitive species of any kind. But the theory is that it's that touch point between two moments that contradict each other. They say that comedy is actually a moment when two things are brought together that can't be conceived of being brought together. When something silly happens in the world, it has to do with two things happening, two things coming together you couldn't conceive of before. Isn't that funny? You know? And so we have the reality that this is always going to occur for all of us, for all the species that ever come about. It's probably healthy it happens up to a point. But the process of cognitive dissonance is sort of a multi-second, multi-minute, multi-hour, multi-day, multi-year thing. It is not a singularity in time, even though there is a crossroads whereby which the two concepts actually occur inside your mind. The things that we have to be concerned about, and what we're going to talk about in this show, are the moments that happen prior to the singularity itself, where you realize that these two things occur, or you don't realize these two things actually are occurring, and then the post-occurrence resolution of dealing with two concepts that come together in your mind that don't make any sense. Both of them can't be true. But now let's think about what it means to have two things collide in your mind that don't make sense. At that moment, there's a possibility that it is merely your lack of perception of reality that says these two things don't belong in the same petri dish together. Or how the hell did you get your chocolate and my peanut butter? And then there are those who understand why those two things come together every once in a while. And to them, it isn't a conflict in the mind. Some things are very random, like chocolate and peanut butter. And some things are never supposed to be together. There are organizations and individuals and groups that when these two things come together, they make excuses. And they try to say to you that it's okay. The emperor has no clothes. I'll give you a few examples. When a Catholic priest was caught touching over 1,000 boys, and more than 580 of them were willing to testify in a court of law. But this is a sanctified church. Cognitive dissonance kicked in for every single Catholic on planet Earth when they had to read every single day that the Catholic Church was participating in the concealment of probably tens of thousands, if not millions, of pedophilia cases as a result of both their nuns and their priests touching kids. Think about that example. On one side of the fence, they're like, yeah, we have a bunch of perverts who hide inside the church. Men who aren't allowed to get married. Probably over 80 to 90% of the men who are gay, who are so guilt-tripped for being gay and guilt-tripped for being married that they just pop. They just pop and they touch kids. So they understand it on their side while these two things are coming together. But from our end, we're like, you guys are supposed to be holy people. You're supposed to be truly and utterly sacrificing your life for the betterment of man in the servants of God. And you're doing anything but serving God. You're committing as blasphemous of a sin as it could possibly happen. But now think about that example and put it on the timetable that we're talking about. There's pre-singularity, pre-occurrence, then the occurrence, then post-occurrence, right? So you're a Catholic and you're going to a Catholic church. You do not sit around studying the idea that priests are going to be touching boys, that nuns will be touching girls inside the school system. It doesn't occur to you because it's not something that's supposed to exist. The charter of these individuals, these human beings, is absolutely counter to anything molestation, sexual. They're supposed to be studying abstinence. Then it occurs, and you have no faculties by which to conceive of what has really happened unless you catch them completely in the act. You open the back door, and you see somebody's son between the legs of a priest, being forced, maybe not being forced, which would make it even more confusing. And you suddenly cannot take the light information coming into your eyeballs and form context, because what you're seeing is absolutely, utterly beyond you to comprehend. So you shut the door real quick, because it's a natural instinct when you invade on someone to shut the door. It's not your kid. Sort of like, well, was that a child? Was that an adult? Who knows, right? And then you've got to deal with it all of a sudden. In the next few seconds, you got to decide, well, do I go back in there and cause a scene? What the hell? Am I that kind of person? Do I confront? Do I kick people's asses? Do I have an Apple Watch and I just walk away? Then you got to deal with it. Now, that particular example is organically grown out of the defects of mankind. People create these man-made religions which create utter incongruent behaviors and commitments with mankind. Every female is programmed to procreate. Every male is programmed to procreate. If kept in a box with someone else, believe me, eventually they're going to try and take care of those genetic instincts and those wills on the other person. That's why there's so much action in prison, right? And both parties will eventually get to the point where they need to satiate that part of their DNA. And even if it's a tumultuous, horrible beginning, more often than not, they succumb. But now that's an organic example of something that happens, again, due to the nature of mankind. But now let's take into account a whole different formula, which is more concerning, which is where it's typically mentioned in the truth movement. We have a situation right now on the internet where we have just to break down how the world's put together, we have the banking cartel families of Europe trying to get their way to put us all underneath their thumb. They're making the move. The 21st century is all about putting us under their thumb, replacing police officers with robots, replacing fast food with robots, taking over education, one world currency, one world army, one world government, one, new world order underneath their thumb. They use corporations through investment banking houses to distribute the money. Where possible, they throw our respective armies all around the world, most of it the United States of America, to crush anyone who remotely resists them. They indoctrinate our children to support the military exercises, not realizing that, they're carrying the banner of whatever is the centralized evil character of this universe. And we're stuck at the bottom, being ruled by a couple grasshoppers. Cognitive dissonance now has a completely different mechanism. Now, if you were to maybe explain to an alien race that didn't understand lies and deceit, for whatever reason they had managed to either not develop it, that being a lie, or they'd managed to evolve so far away from it that they don't actually have any use for it anymore, and they barely really know what it's all about. And we say, yeah, well, you've come to a planet where we lie to each other. We lie to each other on every level of granularity you could possibly imagine, because in our world we are supposed to be held to an ideal of perfection, And if we do not achieve the ideal of perfection, well, 50% of the society will admit it, another 50% will lie through their teeth to make sure they're never caught not having a big savings account, a good job, a great spouse, money for this, money for that, great offspring, great relatives. At the very tippy top, there's people like Hillary Clinton who absolutely will lie about everything constantly. Someone gets in her way, well, someone kills them. Somebody does. And that's the world we have allowed to be created. And we have organic cognitive dissonance, and then we have imposed cognitive dissonance from organizations that create something called PSYOPs. Psychological operations. In the United States of America, it is under the Division of Army. It is referred to as the Army Corps of PSYOPs. Isn't that interesting? Army Corps of brain fucking. That's really what it's all about, right? Now, I have an episode which I'm very proud of called Thought Police. And there's going to be a slight duplicate of what's going on from Thought Police episode to this one, but that was a very long time ago. I did not use the term cognitive dissonance in the Thought Police episode. But that's exactly what it is. Every single electrical pattern we put through our minds goes through the machine of our minds. And, like I've said in several episodes, we don't know what we are, and we seem to be completely content with that. And that can actually be okay, up until the point that someone wants to mess with who we are. And they study it, and we don't. They look at how the brain works, and we don't. The MK Ultra mind control program of the military from like the late 40s to God knows when was all about figuring out the brain at a level that the standard humanity will never know unless they go off and do projects. But how do projects and research get funded? Well, either really rich people who are already in on this thing have to pay for it, or universities who are subsidized by governments, controlled by governments in many different ways, not just direct funding, have to admit that that's what they're going to do, and then that simply doesn't get funded. If you want to use an electron microscope, you have to register with the government what you're looking for. You can't just look. All you're doing is looking at something you have possession of. But you're not allowed to, because you might find something that they don't want you to find. So here's what they figured out. They figured out that the brain's pretty damn cool, but it's also pretty programmable. It's born with really healthy genetic regulators on what is bullshit and what is truth. And then over time, as you're alive and exposed to patterns that are incongruent with the programming within your mind will adapt. And it will allow conflict to be recognized inside the mind as completely sane. The reason why we have this term, cognitive dissonance, is that the brain is actually, I think, born without any capability of comfortably processing such a thing. Now, it could be argued that a child thinks that everything is a conflict. Who knows? Being stuck in a womb for 9 months, but I believe genetic intelligence is extremely real. A lot of animals like elephants who go to water oases in the desert, having never been there in their lifetimes, prove that they carry the ancestral programming from their relatives. And if one water hole goes dry, they have a second one, a third one, a fourth one, based on all of the discoveries of the herd. But now think about what happens to a human being nowadays. Nowadays, just as soon as a child can understand what's on the television, they are presented with incredible levels of crazy stories and facts that they never had to study in the past. There were children, 5-year-old children, that had to endure 9/11 and everything else that was going on. And you could hide a little bit of that stuff, but you can't hide big ones, right? And a child wants to believe, among other things, that they are safe, that their mother goose, father goose are there to protect them, that they're going to be okay. And once you shake the foundation of security in a human being, it is a trauma that they may never bounce back from. Now, they'll find different ways of finding security. But we know from a lot of individuals that we probably personally know, those that are abused when they are young tend to have a 50-50 chance of passing that on to their kids. The other half will figure it out and say, I will never do this to anyone because I hate it. But there's a level of maturity and intelligence that that individual has to also achieve in order to avoid recreating that world. But now imagine that the government or the intelligence agencies that program and charter these Army Corps of PSYOPs. It's very important to realize this. You have a group that gets $1.5 billion a year minimum. That's 10 years ago. That was their budget 10 years ago. That's a lot of money to be spent. What kind of company would have a payroll that large? And it's not because the staff is that large. It's because their facilities and their evil means require that much money. Sure, a few of it goes into radio channels that broadcast over communist China and probably into North Korea or Russia. But I'm going to tell you that more than 51% comes back here at home and is used on us. There is a extremely large contingency that is probably off their payroll that tells them what to do. Now, again, the experiment we always do on this show is, what if you and I were put in charge of such an organization? How would you remotely organize the charter to spend $1 billion, let alone $1.5 billion? That's a hell of a project. I've worked on $300 million builds, and it was 3,500 people. And we were probably buying $150 million worth of hardware, which is where the budget got so high. And the other 150 were a bunch of us working with crappy consulting teams. So at some point, the organization has a need. Now, if any of you have done corporate budgeting, what you'll always realize is that when you talk to the CFO, they tell you, if you don't spend all of your money this year, we're going to reduce your allocation for next year because we will have identified the fact that you simply don't need this much money. And so, like the helicopter that flies over my house, that's part of that problem is that they've got an allocation for the helicopter, for the fuel, for the staff. And so they simply fly the thing to make sure that the budget is entirely consumed. So they get another allocation. Their allocation come in chunks, 3, 5-year, 10-year blocks. And so they'll fly the hell out of it right before the allocation comes around. But every single year, it's important that year over year they spend every single dime. So that's where the snake that would be the Army Corps of PSYOPs could continue growing indefinitely. And when you run out of fun things to do, good things to do, to perhaps spread democracy and freedom in the minds of the people, which is absolutely not their objective, because they very almost immediately serve the intelligence agencies that serve the banking cartel, is to demonize, gender. It's to demonize gun possession. It's to demonize every single molecule of freedom, and to make tyranny look like the logical outcome for society, right? But cognitive dissonance is a disease and a virus that they want every single human being to have. And what do I mean by that? They want you, in your mind, to take anything absolutely asinine, anything contradictory in your brain, and to have a facility in your mind, a mechanism in your mind, to be able to process something that doesn't make any sense. And they want you to feel absolutely euphoric and content with that outcome. Or they want you to merely sweep it underneath the rug. I saw a really interesting example of cognitive dissonance when I was very young. I had a girlfriend. She had a very eccentric father. And one day we went out to watch her little brother play Little League baseball. They won the championship. This is before they gave out trophies for being losers. And so we're totally excited. It was a total surprise. And the father comes up to the son, who's probably, 8, 9 years old, and said, hey, wherever you want to have dinner, we'll have dinner. And it was between Pizza Hut and Tasty Freeze. And he picked Tasty Freeze. And I'm like, okay, I got a car. You got a car, Dad. You take Mom and the older brother, and I'll take the daughter, who I'm dating, and her younger brother, and we'll meet you over there. All right, we'll see you there. It's a teeny tiny town. It takes like 3 minutes to get anywhere. So we drive straight there. We go inside. I was a teenager. I didn't have the kind of cash to pay for everybody at that exact moment. We almost order. But we're sitting there going, well, let's just wait. Let's just wait till they get here. They never show up. So we drive all around town, try to find them. We can't find them. We finally drive home. We're sitting in the kitchen. We're totally confused. Here comes the family, the other part of the family, driving into the garage with groceries. We're like, what the fuck? And he comes inside, the dad, having just made this big, celebratory thing with the child. And we're like, well, where were you? And they're, what are you talking about? The father says. And I said, well, you offered your son any place he wanted to eat, and he picked Tasty Freeze. We went over there and almost ordered. Oh, I don't know what you're talking about. You're all wet on that one, he says. I look at the wife, and she just rolls her eyes. Apparently, Dad was a fucking crazy guy for a really long time, and here he is, maybe in his late 30s, early 40s, completely fucking batshit insane. But I looked at the wife, and she had developed a mechanism for cognitive dissonance. This had been going on for so long, and I don't even know how the guy's still alive to this day, not locked up. But I watched it, and I was just utterly baffled as to how this could occur. How someone could sweep under the rug. And the son started crying. He was so pissed. A parent sees a child cry. Genuinely cry, not just because they bumped their head or something. You should have a empathetic reaction to that. He had nothing, man. This guy was a fucking lizard, if there ever was one, man. But now, I need you to understand. They want you to be that wife. They want you to be that wife that can look at something that makes absolutely no sense. The government going door to door in a country that has a Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. That isn't up for interpretation, really. There's not to be another law on top of that Second Amendment. It is simply that you exist and you have the right to bear arms. But they want soldiers going door to door in Louisiana after Katrina, robbing individuals of their sovereign rights, as defined by the Constitution of the United States, to seem normal. You're watching it, and you can't process it because you've never seen it done before in the last 50 years, maybe even the last 400 years, where the government of the United States, under martial law, took away people's guns, leaving their houses, forcing them out of their homes, making sure all their shit gets stolen and looted, which happened like crazy down there. Now Louisiana is completely flooded. No one gives a crap. On days like 9/11, when NORAD stands down, when the amazing military, Air Force military, does not defend the skies of the United States on a day where the criminals took hours and hours and hours to turn planes around and slam them into buildings. Maybe give them the first one. Well, you didn't know. And then the second one comes in an hour later or whatever. We got one flying over the Pentagon, which is the most heavily protected building on planet Earth. The single brain trust of the military is NORAD when it comes to distributing commands to get stuff done. What is it, Payne Weber and his little plane flew off in the middle of nowhere? He had 2 military escort jets on his ass in 11 minutes once he stopped reporting into ground control, to air traffic control. 11 minutes is all it took for them to monitor and fly so close to the cockpit they realized everyone was asleep, probably due to depressurization. They simply froze to death, which means they probably felt nothing. Less than 10 years later, we can't catch a bunch of airlines flying around. And believe me, I understand all the other theories about the planes and all that stuff. But they're just making a point that what's going on right now in the world is the cognitive dissonance is something that they're trying to instill within you to accept that which is not acceptable. Here we are in the United States of America. I'll give you another round. I'll give you tons of these. Now, I have a double standards episode that mentions this particular one, but this is more deep than I pushed in the double standards episode. If you try to fly anywhere in the United States of America, what happens? They want to put you through this radiation trough to check to see if you have weapons on you. They know that you don't. They're not looking for terrorism. What they're trying to do is train you for tyranny. So pushing you through these troughs, which on the ground it's all about the DUI checkpoints here in America, to put you through some Gestapo technique. They figured that if they train you over 20 years, the next stage of tyranny that will be imposed on you, well, for all the people that go through that radiation trough, you are just sitting there watching the divide of mankind, those who won't go in the machine and those who get a pat down. Everyone who goes to the machine are those that are suffering from a massive level of cognitive dissonance and a lack of science about radioactive radiation hitting your body and bouncing back. And if you listen to the disclaimers in the airport, they never disclaim the fact that that machine is horribly bad for your body. I just happen to have two very good friends who are radiologists who told me about all the science of those machines. It's bad enough that flying from LA to Colorado has the ambient radiation exposure level of a chest x-ray. It's pretty intense. Imagine being a flight attendant. You're getting a tremendous amount of radiation. The body will correct, especially if you take your vitamin C powder time release and your B17, probably some zinc copper, and eat well, your body will repair itself for the most part. So we have this thing called the TSA at the airport, treating everyone like a criminal. But then when the subject of a wall comes up on the southern border of Mexico, everyone's up in arms. The people that are willing to walk through the radiation machine and be treated as if they are a criminal. The people that are in wheelchairs that get body cavity searches because they just look so suspect, right? Grandma who's 83 years old. They will fight you on the border down south. An absolute porous lack of security. If we really are that untrusting of mankind, it's up to you to be trusting or untrusting. You can't have an open border and TSA at the same time and say that you are for the same objective. Your pure-blood Mexican, who's obviously a mix of the indigenous race plus the Spaniards, has damn near black hair and olive skin, if not very dark skin. Well, your average Arab that we're supposed to be afraid of, right, can match that complexion in seconds. Can put on clothing so that from a distance you don't know the difference. They can shave off their beard. Look like your average day worker, right? Walk right across that border. Set up a little cell here. Now, I think most of that's fiction anyway. But if they needed to do that, they could. But now here's the thing. If the government can write scripts on television, write scripts in movies, develop actually human, cattle troughing experiences like the TSA, drunk driving checkpoints. If they can do that to us, then they have taken a bunch of little cognitive dissonance situations and they've created the system in your brain that will be completely content with the illogical up above, a much bigger agenda. A lot of people don't know that in October, there's an organization in the United States called ICANN, I-C-A-N-N, and it is the governing body of the internet. And since the United States military invented the internet in the late 50s, early 60s, and then pawned it off to all the universities of the world around 1969, and then a lot of people believe that because the HTTP protocol came around, which made web pages possible, that the other country invented the internet. No, the other country invented a protocol that was very popular. But then it was immediately bought up and licensed by a company called Netscape in the Silicon Valley, California area, and matured up by Silicon Valley engineers. Everything that's anything in the internet was invented right here in California. The languages, the protocols, etc., etc., didn't already pre-exist before that. And Caltech at Pasadena College was involved deeply with the inception of the internet, along with Dartmouth individuals, right? But they're about to sign over. It's a 50-50 thing. We don't know if Congress is going to be in on this, which I'm sure they are. But they're going to be giving over this organization to an international body to develop policies / what we call bylaws. Bylaws are the rules of a corporation. Same thing. It's just a rule that will govern how we behave on the internet, what is allowed to be posted on the internet. It'll be the power to shut down your website because it is full of too many truths. Imagine you have a fairly benign website, But on one particular day, there's another 1989 Beijing massacre in China. Something happens over there. It's really nasty. I'm totally making that up, right? And you happen to acknowledge it on your website. Now, your website could be a cooking website, could be a mechanic website, but you got a forum up there where people talk about the various things that are pertain to what your charter is. But a comment slips through, and the government has the right, the NWO government, the New World Order government, because will be handed off to this organization if this administration gets its way. All the nasty shit, by the way, happens at the end of a 2-year term. Again, it's not Obama. Obama does nothing. He's just an actor. He's not absolved from the guilt of doing this stuff. He's just the mouthpiece, right? But they could shut down your website. What if your cooking website is saying that a particular ingredient is better than another ingredient, and the one that you don't like is a bigger corporation, one that serves GMO foods, and you're saying the non-GMO one is better, and they just simply want you off the map? So you stick a little PSYOP person, of which comes out of your tax dollars, to post something that will be considered unacceptable by the International Committee of what's allowed on the internet. And they take you down because they really have a little PR PSYOP going against you to get rid of your recommendation to humanity that they should eat healthy food. And the only thing that's left is a bunch of propaganda about how to poison yourself and not worry about it. But now let's dive in here into a lot of the things that are going around the internet that weren't going around the internet, say, a year ago. 1 year ago, I do not remember flat Earth being a theory anywhere on the internet. And now if you so much as put that in the title of your video, you will get massive views. Because people are hungry for more proof, for more evidence, for people, conducting experiments, yada, yada. Now there's the no forest on flat Earth thing. Incredible. And when I did my episode, I said, the no forest on flat Earth is incredible on one level, and that what I forgot to probably put in better words was that particular theory shows you the permutation of cognitive dissonance having spread throughout society, where people are willing to chuck out any other logical theory based on science pretty much overnight. They'll watch an 80-minute video and think that all mountains used to be trees, just instantaneously. And then they, run around YouTube and leave all these, acidic comments that if you so much are skeptical with a science background, they're trying to chop you down, metaphorically speaking. But we had a viewer, and I've got another episode in the queue. I'm not sure that I'll get that one out before this one. But we had a comment come in from a guy named Dan Nihil, Nihil. Absolutely brilliant post about a paper that was written in 2008 that was essentially talking about cognitive infiltration. And it was to get into the utter fabric of what we believe to be cognitive reality and to disrupt that intensely. And under any other title that we would come up with, that was a PSYOP being designed in a paper to say that, or essentially to echo what Zbigniew Brzezinski said in 2005, right? Which was that the internet is the greatest threat to the ruling class and that it has to be shut down, but we have to do it very strategically in a way that we don't create an uproar in society. Because again, we are the ants and they are the grasshoppers, to quote the Bugs Life movie metaphor. So now you think about some of these movements like Flat Earth, and again, I cover this a lot, and the episode's going to be called Fictional Realities. So I apologize for the overlap, but just thinking about it, there's a different point I'm making in fictional realities that has its own merit, I believe. But what they need us to do is to be essentially incapable of locking down anything in reality. When I started watching my friends, and I had the same experience, by the way, I'm not trying to keep myself separate, but when my friends and I started watching the Flat Earth stuff and realizing the mountains of information that at least exposes the space agencies as not being completely truthful. And that's really the major benefit of studying that theory. For those that were persuaded by it, the common phrase when you look at the Flat Earth stuff and you give it a chance, you don't just knee-jerk it away from you, you start to say, geez, I wonder what reality is. I really wonder what is true anymore. And you start losing faith that you have any grasp of reality. In the end, hopefully in this show, you get the constant theme that it really doesn't matter as long as you can rule the halo sphere around your life. Hey man, can you find love? Can you find purpose? Can you improve people's life? Can you be a good person? That's really where it's at. It's in a localized region. The internet makes you believe that you should hear every single piece of bad news around the world. Believe me, bad news will feed into this cognitive dissonance formula in your mind. How could a person do that? If you've ever said that, then you're dealing with a moment of cognitive dissonance. And if you can somehow accept the fact that that happens, then they've essentially won. And sometimes we do have to acknowledge the fact that people do really evil things that we can't imagine. That is how the ruling class, as noted in 1979, I believe, when David Rockefeller was addressing the press corps at a big meeting, at a big party, he said, he gave a special shout out to the press, and he says, I want to thank all of you in this room, because if it weren't for you hiding what we do, we couldn't get done what needs to be done in the world. And of course, everyone's bought into the fact that these guys actually have our greater good at hand, right? But what I said in the Thought Police episode is essentially what I'm trying to say here, which is if you developed a mechanism by which you can accept the unacceptable, both that which is true, of which you are unaware of, you're getting presented two pieces of information about reality. One is probably more true than the other one, although they could probably throw at you two completely falsehoods. And if this mechanism is very well oiled in your mind, you will pick from either two evils, or if you're really astute and really amazing, I think perhaps you can say neither of these are true. When I did my firmament episode, it's sort of one of those neither algorithms. Let's just say, we exist here. And so you have a choice of believing in a heliocentric ball Earth, because every other space body we can see is round. Or you can go with the flat Earth firmament, which if you are a Christian, you can read all about it. In fact, if you're just even the Bible, which is Old Testament, you could have deviated before the New Testament came around and never settled with Jesus. But you'll believe it is a firmament air bubble between two pockets of water. Why God would be some aquatic creature makes no sense to me, but people believe that. All right. And then there's this thing in the center which says perhaps space exists, something like that exists. Maybe it's a simulation in a computer. And because you don't have to program it, if you don't have to program it, they put us in a snow globe. A lot of you who are not near Hollywood, you may not know this, but when they do a lot of the CG, the computer graphics that you see in movies and television, if there is a side of an object that is not visible by the camera, they simply don't model it. What does that mean? Well, when you watch Battlestar Galactica, the reprisal in the last decade here, the mothership, which is the Battlestar Galactica ship, it's so massive that one, they had a hard time putting the whole thing in memory, but they just simply didn't render one half of the ship because it was never fully in the view of the camera. So only the surfaces that were being hit by the camera had the detail. So my assertion, if we are on a flat petri dish floating in some simulation, either in a computer or in space, the vacuum of space, with some firmament dome over us, it could be an alien construct. Why build a heliocentric ball if you don't have to? Maybe that's where they live, but maybe they're just making a little simulator for us. Maybe we're connected to a giant spaceship like they prophesized in Star Trek, right? Every single time you see a false flag, and within 36 to 72 hours, we have enough photographic evidence, videotape evidence, backgrounds on individuals that are participating as crisis actors. Once we understand that it is an operation to create an event, you can start seeing and escaping the cognitive dissonance algorithm that is supposed to be instilling on your body. But then when you go to public and you hear people talk about it as if it was real, or they change their profile pic with a little overlay of color on Facebook, you can start to see those that are still suffering from a full case of it. One, you have to be aware of it. You have to be aware of its definition. Again, one of the more interesting instantiations of this is comedy. We love it. We pay for comedy. We go to nightclubs or comedy houses and we listen to people get on stage and they craft story after story after story of cognitive dissonance. Except the beauty of it is that we go into it understanding that it is a gimmick. You know, for those of you who remember the old comedian Stephen Wright, who had all these crazy, funny-ass things that he would talk about, you didn't get done with his 1 hour series and say, oh, all those things are true. Because in a way, the whole thing with a stand-up comedian is to tell you lie after lie after lie and make it funny. But now the context of reality as it comes to you, again, is that you wake up and you go out on your patio like I do and you just simply look around. You look around and you go, wow, that's reality. This is the real deal. Yeah, my rose bushes just bloomed and they're done with that whole sequence. I know in about 6 months my palms are going to start making their big plumes, little seeds that fall over the place. This is my reality. Neighbor turns on the music across the street. I go over there and drink a beer and eat some burgers. That's reality. That's the stuff I can rely on. But then what do? I might hit my Facebook feed. I might go on the news organization that I think bullshits me the best. And I just start looking and I start trying to decipher. And I'm taking in a bunch of fictional reality as my real reality. On a particular day, there might be a fake massacre or sort of a hybrid. People are really getting killed, but the whole thing is sponsored by the government. Maybe not mine, maybe some other higher shadow government. Who knows? SpaceX publishes a bullshit computer graphic launch of a rocket going up in the air and landing on some barge in the middle of the ocean. I know that more than 95% of everyone I know believes that it really happens because they know nothing about computers, software at all. They don't know what a rigging system is, a mesh, Maya. They don't know. The truth movement. I have debated creating an episode completely about the truth movement. I probably will. I feel like I've already sort of done it through all the other episodes, but it's always nice to aggregate something together in a single episode. You know, I don't put myself off as a person, you know, with a big giant personality, and I don't put myself off as a person with the truth. Hey man, I'm one dude with some thoughts, and you guys are kind enough to make it to 50 minutes in an episode and listen to me. So I'm just the average Joe, just like one of you. I think that's why we get along real well, right? But if you're going to stand up and you're going to take an authoritative position within the truth movement, then the one thing that you have to be extremely aware of is this cognitive dissonance and how it's what it is, how subtle it can be, how profound it can be, and where it comes from. Like I said, it can come from serendipitous experiences. The frailties of man to create an organized religion which isolates males into priesthood and females into nunhood, and their simple biological genetic needs pop out in the worst ways of pedophilia or just a rape and abuse. And then it can come out in a very intentional way by allowing a government body, the Army Corps of Psyops, to hide in secrecy, to absolutely never, ever, ever publish a single thing that they do. Do you realize if you try to find out their agenda, you'll get sort of this circa, World War II, 1940s pitch on what they do. Well, we drop leaflets in Northern Korea. Yeah, we broadcast freedom radio into China. Some low-hanging thing. And, I'm sure they do that all day long as well. But who do they work for? Who do they work for? And do those agencies actually have a consistent record of working for us? Just remember the old question I proposed a long time ago, which will put everyone on their knees very quickly. And you say that, especially if you talk to a baby boomer who's 55 and over, you look at them and you say, look, in your entire lifetime, regardless of what country you live in, what laws or statutes have been passed into effect in your society that have improved your life? In America, there's only two valid answers that I've really heard. One is civil rights. Women's suffrage was before before the baby boomers were born. And maybe seatbelts. Those are the two big ones. Minimum wage, well, that's a catastrophe in itself. We have to have things called minimum wage because the jobs in America are disappearing. There's only one candidate running for president who's even run for president in the last 30 years who's addressed the problem, who's even said that it would be a part of his platform to fix. None of the other presidents have. Not in my lifetime. Not since JFK, but JFK didn't have the problem to solve in the first place. Once NAFTA happened in the early 90s, as Ross Perot warned us, the giant sucking sound started to happen. And all the manufacturing jobs left the United States, and the education did not supplant the lack of knowledge, right? So we don't have colleges really understanding how to teach computer science properly until probably the mid to late 90s. And those were the choice, lucky colleges that went first. You know, I studied computer science at De Anza Junior College, which is where Steve Jobs went for a little short bit. It's down the street from Apple. It's down the street from Hewlett-Packard. It's down the street from everything in Silicon Valley. And the systems that the VAX computer that I was studying on it was 1982 or 3 when I was there. That computer was maybe circa 1981. Horrible mainframe system. But less than 2 blocks away, they had the microcomputer revolution occurring right in their backyard, but they couldn't hire a professor that knew anything about it. The most you could get out of it were algorithms that you could use in your microcomputer programming world, but no one had a compiler for a Mac or for an Apple computer, Macintosh computer, PC, or anything. Windows, though they used those systems here and there in the university, but they didn't have any knowledge of how to use them. And hell, it was 10 years old by then. You didn't have BASIC being taught there. I'm always talking about the bottom of the pyramid, at least in this season 2. It's sort of something I figured out how to say. We have to rebuild and reinforce and reconstruct the consciousness of the bottom of the pyramid. I'm not sure I can come up with a more poignant charter for our civilization. All countries, all races, all walks of life at the bottom of the pyramid. You know, we are the 99.9% of the world. But I can't think of a better thing for us to study and think about consciously than cognitive dissonance. The problem is that it's a weird thing to say. But I don't know of any other real easy way to put it into words besides what I said in my Thought Police episode. The one thing I think I put together, and I'll hear people talk about quite a bit in the comments, is that we've had a lot of things demonized in the world that may or may not be as dark as we think. The intent of the individuals or the organizations may not be what we thought they were. But we are simply told who the enemy is. And I want you to think about that for a split second. Think about wherever you were born and wherever you've lived in life. Some of you have been around the world and you've seen some shit. But now I want you to think about if you lived a fairly normal life in the United States of America or wherever you're from, and if you never turned on television or radio, you never watched a movie that did this or a television show that did this, and this being told you who the enemy was, would you believe you had any enemies? I think you wouldn't. For those who've been in the military and you've traveled and you've had to shoot guns at people and you've had to take people's lives, regardless of what side you're on, who told you who the enemy was? Did you just come up with that on your own? For our young men that have to go over to Eurasia and fight, well, there was a couple catalyzing events that make us believe that those are the enemies. But there's a lot of evidence to suggest that that might have been a self-imposed wound, all of them, here in the United States of America, to incubate up a long-term plan to get the individuals of this world between the ages of 19 and 23 to swallow the pill that the enemy is whoever they need to be moved out of the way, right? Think about all the video games that are out there. You know, I've had to play or see and understand pretty much every video game made from, I probably self-taught from 1980 to 89 when I joined the industry. And then I kept on it I'm probably still on it to this day. I don't play a lot of the console games I used to play. But just think over the last 15 years, the amount of first-person shooters related to urban warfare to incubate up in the minds of children who the enemies are. Ubisoft, a French company. I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine, group of friends. we're talking about how stereotypical it is that the games have certain factions that are always the bad people, right? The Arabs, the Chinese, and the Mexicans. Bizarrely, the Mexicans were the target inside of I think the first Ghost Recon game of Ubisoft. American soldiers with super tech on their bodies were down in Mexico in urban warfare killing Mexicans. A French company deploys that in the United States of America. Interesting, right? Programming the minds of kids over here with an agenda. Someone will remember that. Now, those kids who play Ghost Recon, Kill Mexico, are now pretty much adults. If they played it at 15 years old, they're at least 25 years old now. They're past the impressionable 19 to 23 stage where you'll believe anything if you're prone to do so. They know that, herding groups, gangs, are all based on broken families. You join cults, you join the devil-worshipping organizations, you join the Crips, the Bloods, whatever gang you want to name. You do it because your family at home is broken, and the group is providing the family unit. What do you think the military is? For those of you who've been in the military, and I grew up in it, there is a camaraderie. And if you believe you're the protectors of the world, you're the protectors of freedom and truth, just, you're sort of like, I'm going to become the best shot. I'm going to become the most healthy I possibly can so that when I get the command from the CO above me, I'm ready to go. I don't want to have to deal with who's the bad guy and who's the good guy. You think it up for me and you just tell me. Because I got all these guns and bullets. I got this incredible skill I never get to use, and you can tell me I've got a reason to push launch on a Tomahawk missile or pull the trigger on my gun. Well, shit, I get to do what I'm really good at. I mean, did I really devote my whole life to killing people and I really don't get to kill people? I'm so glad you could find enemies for me. Can you imagine killing someone that you don't know anything about, that you've been told is the enemy? You don't speak their language. You don't know the streets of their towns. You don't know the lineage of their land. You don't have any knowledge of them, historically, culturally. But someone tells you to kill them and you do it. Maybe it's for a paycheck. Maybe it's just because you believe in what they're telling you. If you have been pre-programmed with cognitive dissonance formulas over and over and over since you were born, if you're a truther of any kind, and you watch this show, what I love about this show is that if you get to this point, we're slightly over an hour where I am right now in the episode, you will have experienced this thing, which is you try to tell someone something that is different than what they believe, and they shut the conversation down. I don't want to talk about that. Let's not go there. I know where you're going with that. Let's not go there. It's a big part of my fictional realities episode. But if you've ever experienced that particular thing, then you'll find a person that hasn't oiled the machine well enough to swallow the truth. They have always been presented the propaganda lie, which feels better, and the truth, or if maybe they haven't even been given the other side, but they've been given something that feels better. I have an episode called Waking Up, and it's where I cover, I believe, the algorithm that the mind hates pain. And there's a biological threshold in the mind of man that says, that's too painful for me to consider. So I can't look at the facts. I can't look at the suggested facts, the circumstantial evidence to possibly believe what you're saying. And in the end, it creates an encapsulated world where the emperor can walk around without any clothes. And because that's not a good idea, they believe he has clothes. Just imagine that whole thing. Imagine the whole thing that was such an understanding of society that someone created the phrase, 1,000 years ago? The emperor has no clothes. And the little boy standing in the crowd says, look, mommy, he has no clothes on. Because the child hadn't been programmed. That's what the saying means. So this game has been played for a very long time, and I'm willing to suggest that for the first several tens of thousands of years, the only cognitive dissonance that happened in man was organic. We accidentally created situations that made this occur in the human mind. Perhaps it's the way that we deal with reality on any level. For all those brilliant men and women that had to engage in war 100, 150 years ago, especially the Civil War, when they had to look at, the Battle of Gettysburg, and they're looking at, again, a field that's just swimming in blood. It looks like someone has routed a river of blood into the valley because, you got a cannonball 6 inches thick traveling at 300 miles an hour going through, 20 people, ripping them in pieces. And there's 100 of these things coming over every second. That's a hell of a world to live in, isn't it? And only the people that are really hit have a chance of completely absorbing what just happened. When they look at their legs over there and their torsos over here, well, they're probably going to go into some Kubler-Ross shock for a little while, but eventually they will wake up, if they do, without their legs. And they're going to go, shit, that happened. I live with the permanent scar of that happening. If we can recognize this, bring this up to our friends, turn it in your head, because you guys are brilliant, man. You guys have just the most incredible comments. You guys will write comments that after an episode, and I will sit there and go, damn it, I wish I had thought of that. It's like I want to redo the episode sometimes when you guys make comments. But if nothing else, I'm hearing you, and it's infecting the DNA of future episodes, I do want to make a correction about my Satan episode, because I will probably go back and redo it at some point. It's really odd to redo a season 1 episode from season 2, but I don't want a bunch of holes in the sequences of numbers. So I won't completely take it out until I replace it. But I talked about how when the King and Queen of England came over to Canada, they went to an adoption agency and ran off with a bunch of kids. And either I got it remembered wrong, or the woman that did the video a long, long time ago that I saw got it wrong, and I simply remembered it wrong. So I'm going to blame myself without verifying that. But it wasn't an adoption agency. It was a residential school. And I guess at the time in British Columbia, they had just a tremendous problem up there. And I guess the individuals that were abducted and never were found were 5 boys. And again, the information I saw was a lot more diverse than that. But this individual lives in Canada, has a more first-hand perspective of this, and I guess in one way or another was very close to the event occurring. So I just wanted to correct that real quick. There's a lot more details to it, but I guess that it was related to the government losing kids in foster care situations, and it was related to churches doing what they do. So I'm going to get all the evidence from this individual and remake that episode, but I just want to put a button on that in case any of you have seen that or you go back to view it. So just understand, I do really try to keep the integrity of the episodes up as much as possible. The other episode that's going to get redone will be the Mission to Mars hoax, because I have a lot of science that if you do not watch it annotated in YouTube, you are going to be getting a lot of estimations which are incorrect. It's not the end of the world, because the overall thrust of the episode is correct, but when I mention various facts, some of it I just loosely mention, and I say I don't know exactly what the numbers were, and then in the annotation I show you all the numbers. But I will redo it in a way that I actually say the numbers and get it right, just so you know. But anyway, we need to rebuild this pyramid from the bottom up. Think about it like that. Just understand that people aren't going to move at the same velocity that you are. They're not going to have the background that you are. They're not going to have the hunger for the information like you do. For folks that are really old, and I don't mean their age, but when they're old in the head, and they're set in their ways, and I would say probably 55 and over. If you run into folks up in that area that simply can't hear, just let them be that overwhelming majority of folks that will never know. Maybe in their lifetime we can clear up and get, like when Russia had the coup in 91 or whatever, they were able to raid the KGB files and prove to the Russian citizens that they had been spied on their entire lifetime, right? If we have one of those events, that's probably what would happen if we were to get these other folks converted. They're going to need to see it in a more black and white manner. Just let them go. Don't lose your happiness trying to convert anyone. And really, converting folks is a hard one. And for folks that will, it's really interesting, like when you meet someone in real life and you tell them any of this stuff, they typically don't call you a shill, because they follow you back out to your car. They realize you're not driving some Bernie Sanders' $150,000 car going home to your $1 million home and claiming that you're a socialist, they'll see that you're real, and they just simply think, well, that person's misinformed. They don't understand what they're talking about, da-da-da. If it comes through YouTube, what's really, really funny is they have this incredible imagination about people talking on the internet, and oh boy, they're you're a shill, blah blah blah. Stick around, watch most of the videos. You'll find out that if nothing else, I might be misinformed about something, but not everybody in the world's a shill. So we have to keep our eyes open for those individuals as well. Go watch my episode on shills. I think it'll give you some of the equipment that you need to discern sort of the behavior of individuals that are such thing. If you made it this far, thanks for listening. If you haven't been already, go to mkultraradio.com. There's audio if you're on video if you're on audio. That's all you need to know. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I will see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over down.